Welcome back in. It is the halftime show, hour number 2. Tyler Ed and David Ayer along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Again, Bill Gunner gave us the update there from Truist Park. Braves still knotted 2-2 with the Giants in the bottom of the second inning out there in this getaway game. For them, they'll be back in action on Friday night as they take on the Texas Rangers. Again, we are 39 days away from football starting, for the Gamecocks at least. And as we're looking ahead to this season, I think it's well established that the SEC is full of a lot of good quarterbacks, right? And particularly South Carolina's schedule is full of a lot of good quarterbacks because you do got to play Clemson. Obviously, this year you do got to play Virginia Tech as well. So you're playing 10 Power 4 opponents over the course of your 12-game regular season. You're going to run into some interesting challenges at quarterback. And I think South Carolina is one of the few programs in the country that's going to have to take on some of the top quarterbacks in all of college football over the course of its regular season. The Athletic put out its list of quarterback tiers the other day. This list made by Sam Conn Jr. and Antonio Morales. I believe they do this every year, but they take all 136 FBS quarterbacks and they separate them into 7 different tiers. So at tier 1, you have the most talented quarterbacks in the country with the highest ceilings. They can carry their team and are often the biggest keys to victory, meaning this tier find themselves in the Heisman Trophy conversation, all the way down to tier 7, which is a largely unproven group with some decent G5 returning starters, but also QBs who haven't played much at all or have had made multiple stops in their college careers of finally putting it all together. So that's your 2 ends of the spectrum when it comes to the tier list here for the Athletic and the tiers of quarterbacks in college football. And to no surprise, you don't really have to go that far till you find Lenora Sellers on this list coming in at number 3 in tier 1, who's playing in the SEC as a returning starter. We've talked about his level of production a year ago and what the ceiling and anticipation for what he can do this upcoming season already is. But it's really what I see around him that truly stands out to me. If you're going to say, okay, Sellers is 3, it's probably easy to figure out who number 1 and number 2 are. Again, 2 teams that South Carolina is going to have to play this upcoming season with Cade Klubnik at number 1 and Garrett Nussmeier at number 2. I mean, these are all 3 guys that are believed to be potential first-round picks when the draft rolls around coming up in April, and any one of them can lay claim to being potentially the first overall pick, depending on how this upcoming season does end up going. But to highlight how difficult of a challenge South Carolina has ahead of it, you see these 2 teams, you see these 2 quarterbacks being put even ahead of Lenora Sellers in this list, which again is just the opinion of a couple people at the Athletic, but it kind of represents what the thought process is for all these quarterbacks around the entire country. And again, Garrett Nussmeier, I think, is maybe the most pro-ready quarterback. When you read the projections, when you read draft reports, all those kind of things, they like everything he brings to the table. We talked about it yesterday. Matt Moscona of Locked On LSU was upset that Garrett Nussmeier wasn't the first team All-SEC quarterback, which, hey, I voted for him that way because I thought he was the best overall. And at least on this list, he is ahead of Lenora Sellers, but he's somebody you're going to have to deal with. He's going to be an issue this upcoming year, and that game's going to be in Baton Rouge, obviously, which makes it that much more, that much more difficult. So you got to deal with him. And then at the end of the regular season, you have Cade Klubnik, and Cade Klubnik's one of those guys that the perception on him has changed so much in just his short time as a starter in college football. I mean, again, he took over at the end of 22. Helped them win the ACC championship and all that kind of stuff. And 23 had its ups and downs. Remember, he and Dabo didn't seem to be on the same page about a lot of things. Klubnik was somebody that went into business for himself on a couple of occasions that bit Clemson back in that 23 season, but he improved dramatically a season ago. And he has got one of the more talented rosters, one of the more experienced rosters, maybe more specifically in college football this upcoming year, that makes it seem like, Clemson's as primed as they have been in a while to potentially make a run at another national championship. That is a quarterback that South Carolina is also going to have to deal with at the end of the regular season. So Klubnik, Nussmeier, and Sellers, your 1, 2, 3 on this list. Number 4, maybe a little surprising. John Mateer, quarterback at Oklahoma. And by the way, I spoke earlier on this morning to Cale Gundy, former Oklahoma quarterback, one-time assistant for the Sooners, and currently works for the sports animal out there in Norman, about John Mateer and, what he's seen out of him and all that kind of stuff, what his concerns are. And I'll let you hear that conversation coming up a little bit later on in the show. But the hype is real. A lot of people believing that John Mateer can come in and really set the world on fire in his one season at this point at Oklahoma. And gosh knows they need it. Venables on the hot seat. That, 500 and below 500 will not be accepted for very long, and he's really putting his eggs in the basket that John Mateer is going to be that guy. And when you look on his tape from a season ago, and again, you'll hear Cale Gundy talking about this, later on in the show, this is a guy that plays with a reckless abandon, somebody that's not afraid to go out there, run around, get hit, those kind of things, but also has a heck of an arm. He can sling it all over the place, which you saw last year in his time at Washington State. The concern comes in with, okay, but how's that going to fare against Power 5 competition, specifically in the SEC? Because when he took on Washington and we took on Texas Tech, 2 games that Wazoo did win, he, as a passer, not all that impressive. Completed under 40% of his passes, had 2 touchdowns and 2 picks over those 2 games. Now, running was a different story. He ran for just shy of 200 yards against Texas Tech, ran for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns against Washington. So this guy has skills. This guy has ability. He is a Manziel-esque type of player. You just have to wonder okay, is it going to be that same kind of result in the SEC that it was when he was down there over there in Washington State, basically playing a G5 schedule a year ago? That's what we have to wait and see. Now, I would imagine he's probably going to be better than what they had last year, namely for the potential help that he has around him. And that's going to be a huge matchup, by the way. That game in the middle of October, it's the week after Oklahoma plays Texas in Red River, and it's going to be right in the midst of that grind of the middle of the regular season schedule for South Carolina as they try and once again put themselves in position to make a case for the college football playoffs. That matchup's going to be huge that day. And Mateer's gonna be somebody to have to deal with. Again, it's not just his throwing. It's obviously keeping him in the pocket and putting pressure on him and all those kind of things, and not like letting him escape and make things happen with his feet. But we'll have to see. But this kind of reinforces what I'd heard, what I've read, and all these kind of things with all the hype around John Mateer and what they believe he can be for this Oklahoma football program. We'll see certainly if that does end up being the case. Looking elsewhere on this list, some other interesting notes in here as well. Again, this is broken up into 7 tiers. You got 3 Tier 1 quarterbacks that you're going to take on. Only 1 in Tier 2. Pavia, ranked 15th overall, is seen as a Tier 2 quarterback, according to the Athletic. And for reference, Tier 2 says winners who have proven their mettle. They can carry the team but have limitations when it comes to certain traits or question marks about their consistency. I feel like that's pretty accurate for Diego Pavia. We talk about him not having necessarily the prospects to play football at the professional level, which was all the more reason for him to, try and sue the NCAA to come back for an extra year by saying his JUCO year shouldn't count against him. But he is a winner. That's the important thing to note there. He is a winner that has proven his mettle. He's somebody that entire team rallies behind and believes. And, this is the first time in several years I think people don't look at that Vanderbilt game on South Carolina's schedule and say, that's an easy win. Chalk that one up. No problem there, because when you have that dude playing quarterback, and he played his guts out last year against Carolina, but got beat up as that game, as that game went along, then there's always a believability now, I feel like, with him that Vanderbilt can give you problems, and Vanderbilt, if you're not careful, can upset you like they did to Alabama 1 season ago. Let's see, only 1 quarterback in Tier 3 for South Carolina opponent-wise, that being Marcel Reed, who, again, came along as the season happened last year and was riding a nice little wave of momentum coming in to the year, excuse me, coming to that matchup against South Carolina. But Carolina did contain him for that game, and obviously ended up pulling off the win against the then number 10 A&M. In tier number 4, you do have Kyron Drones of Virginia Tech. You have Bo Pribula of Missouri, Ty Simpson of Alabama, and Austin Simmons of Ole Miss. Drones is kind of the one outlier here because he did start last year. Now he's getting paired with Philip Lindsay as the new OC out there at Virginia Tech, so maybe that can be the catalyst for change for them this upcoming year. But everybody else is all kind of in that category of just unknown. And these are names we've heard for a while. Bo Pribula backed up Drew Aller at Penn State. Austin Simmons, came in when he needed to for Jackson Dart last year, namely for that touchdown drive against Georgia. And then Ty Simpson's been on Alabama's roster forever. We just feel like we still don't know a whole lot about him because he's just not gotten ample opportunity to play. Does that mean he's not good enough, or just the guys he was behind were too good? Well, we'll have to see. So that kind of puts you in that unknown category as of right now. And then last but not least, again, just looking at the Power 4 opponents that South Carolina's going to play, you have Zach Calzada of Kentucky, who, again, a prior starter at A&M, went to JUCO for a couple years, has come back now to the SEC, but going to be doing it with not the most talent around him, certainly not what he had at A&M a few years back. And, seeing if he's any better. He's been slinging the rock at Incarnate Word, but again, that's the FCS level. So not a lot of hope and anticipation. I think he got voted. Was he the last quarterback in the SEC last week? On some of the QB rankings list that we saw coming into the year. So that kind of checks out there that he would be in the tier 5 and 63rd overall, as hopefully, much like Brock Vandagriff last year, South Carolina will have no problem taking care of him when those two square off coming up towards the end of the first month of the season there. Again, we are counting down 39 days until kickoff. We are in the midst of ACC and Big Ten media days. A lot of talking going on already yesterday as well as today up there in Charlotte. Our guy Scott Hamilton's been covering it for the Post and Courier. We'll talk to him coming up next as the halftime show rolls along. Tyler Head and Captain Dave along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyrek, Cap, and Dave along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Again, ACC and Big Ten Media Days going on right now in Charlotte for the ACC and Las Vegas for the Big Ten. And we'll get some insight from our guy Scott Hamilton of the Post-Courier in just a moment as he is out there actively covering ACC Media Days in Charlotte. But I want to go back to something that was talked about yesterday. Cut number 6 here, Dave. This is ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips, who gives his own take on the ongoing debate of the 9 conference games, which, of course, the SEC is being discussed as a conference that could do that, as well as the ACCs. They're the only 2 Power 4 conferences that don't currently play 9 conference games in the regular season. But Jim Phillips brings up something here that, unfortunately, I'm noticing as a trend in terms of what might go away if the ACC and the SEC opted to go to those 9 conference games.
We have discussed 9. We've discussed 9 several times in my 5 years as commissioner. The group has always felt that at the end of the day, those non-conference games have really been good for the league, and we have really scheduled well. So it isn't as if our league has just kind of looked aside about strength of schedule. They have. If you go to 9, if the SEC ends up going to 9 and maybe we end up going to 9, I think there's a few challenges. Those rivalry games that we really enjoy, I think that the fans really enjoy, I think some of those go away. And it now focuses more on everybody's conference schedule than it is a mix of conference schedule and non-conference. Also, I think it's a challenge for us with an odd number of schools at 17 and how you exactly work that out. So that in itself, there's some difficulty there. And I continue to talk to Greg, and I talk to Tony and Brett all the time. I mean, we have frequent conversations. So, I mean, no one's kind of moving in a vacuum on this. We're exchanging, thoughts there, and we'll see. At the end of the day, I like where our league is. I like where we're at in 8 games, because we're playing the type of caliber that I described, 26 really good non-conference games. But we'll adjust if we have to. And I think all of this remains a work in progress.
And that's Jim Phillips, commissioner of the ACC, speaking at the opening yesterday up there in Charlotte. The guy that's covering it for the Post-Courier this week is none other than a guy, Scott Hamilton. We'll get back into what what Jim Phillips said in just a second. First of all, man, how the heck are you? Got him potted up, Dave?
Hey, how we doing?
There we go. There it is. All right, now we hear you. Now we hear you.
I actually said some gold and I had things muted. I'm sorry, but when I was on hold, I thought that was you talking.
No,
not Jim Phillips.
I don't have the sultry. I don't have the sultry tones of Jim Phillips, unfortunately.
He's you the later years.
Okay, I got something to look forward to then, at least.
Yeah, being third in a Power 4.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that in a moment. One thing I wanted to get to off of what Jim Phillips said, because this is starting to bother me, because this whole 9-game thing keeps coming up in reference to the SEC and the ACC. And one thing that keeps coming up when this gets talked about, Sankey said it last week, a lot of coaches said it last week, is this notion that if you go to 9 games, all these rivalries suddenly go away. The Palmetto Bowl, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Kentucky, Louisville. Here's my thing. They don't have to, but I feel like they're fear-mongering us into thinking that's going to happen to try and drive the opinion away from moving to a 9th conference game for both conferences.
I think what it is, Tyler, those games are competitive games by and large. You would agree. Power 5 non-conference game. What it does, it paints them in a corner, because then that means they'll have to give up playing Cupcake Saturday or playing a team from the MAC or whatever at some point during the season. And it's just going to make things more difficult. And coaches by and large, I'm not saying they run from challenges, but they like manageable schedules. They like to have power.
Sure.
And when you are locked in perpetuity with those kinds of games, you have no control over it. You have no power. That game is going to be played. State legislature gets involved if you don't do it, so on and so forth. And that gives them the heebie-jeebies. But if they can wiggle out of that, yeah, most of them will probably do it.
Yeah, and I get it from that standpoint of wanting to have the most easily workable schedule as possible. I get it, but this notion like, well, we won't be able to do that anymore is so ridiculous to me. Same thing that happened when Bedlam went away and Mike Gundy said, we can't play Oklahoma anymore. Like, what's stopping you? You got 3 open spots in your schedule. Just put them in one of those spots and go forward with it. But everything is so much more complicated in college sports where, unfortunately, because we're having to impress a committee of 13 people every single year, it's all about style points. And that could be the catalyst for these kind of things going away if they move to 9 conference games.
But you know what? And here's where my thinking flipped over the last 24 to 48 hours after Tony Petitti spouted that nonsense about a team going, 8-4 or 6-3,
6-3 in the Big 6-3 in the Big Ten.
Wow. That you have a possibility of having some really mediocre at best teams getting in to the college football playoff. That gave me the heebie-jeebies. And what it did is it made me shift more to the thinking of, you know what? At least the selection committee can talk about it. At least they can put logic in. It won't be just metric driven by strength of schedule and so on. I mean, okay, Tyler, who would you rather have in the playoff? Would you rather have an 8 and I saw this example earlier. Would you rather have an 8-4 Iowa or a 10-2 BYU? I mean, what is that? Which one are you going to go for? You're going to go with the BYU?
Yeah, I'm probably going to go with BYU. And Iowa, as great as they are defensively, I know that offense isn't going to score more than 6 points, which that'll be fun to watch.
No, it's going to be flipped this year. That's the narrative out there. Man, I know. I was shocked by it, too. They are going to actually maybe be better offensively than defensively this year. Their offense is going to be pretty good. At least by Iowa standards.
I'll believe it when I see it, and we can get back to that at a later time. How about that?
I think we should start something where we have an Iowa watch each week just to see how they're doing.
Well, we had an Iowa watch a couple years ago when Brian Ferentz was chasing that, average of 24 points per game total or whatever he had to beat the incentive that he couldn't do. Yeah, we track that every week.
What was it, 24.5 points a game?
Something stupid like that. Something really, really low that even he couldn't get over that hump. And, he didn't get fired, but they had to move on from him. Kirk Ferentz will never change.
They have the Iowa wave. I'll give them that.
That is cool, yeah, but, God, they could have won national championships if they cared about offense.
My only Iowa story is that when Hayden Fry took over, he wanted their uniforms to be like the Steelers. That's why they look the way they do now.
Okay, I have actually always wondered about that because it's almost a carbon copy of what the old school Steelers uniform is. Enough about Iowa, though. We do got some ACC to talk about here. You wrote your article on the Post and Courier earlier on this morning about, hey, the ACC, they're cool with being third, it seems like, which, hey, you're not last, so I guess you're not the Big 12, but third is still pretty sizable gap away from the SEC and the Big 10 are right now.
Yeah, and it's not going to get any closer, Tyler. You and I both know that. They're not going to close that gap. There's no way they can close that gap. And they are trying to just celebrate the wins they have while they have them, while they can do that. Because I know, Jim Phillips knows that come 2030, 2031, when these TV contracts start expiring, when the buyouts are lowered to get out of the conference and this and that, the ACC as we know it, we've said it on this program, the ACC as we know it's not going to exist. And it's going to be more like the Pac-12, the new Pac-12, than the SEC, the Big Ten, or even the current ACC.
Yeah, and you bring up that point. I'll save this for the other side so we have plenty of time to get into it. But this is the first time in a couple of years the ACC does go into media days without a ton of controversy stirring around their conference, which we'll touch on coming up next as the halftime show rolls along. He is Scott Hamilton of the Post and Courier. I'm Tyler Head, Cap and Dave producing on the other side of the glass on your Wednesday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head and Captain Dave, along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game, talking all things ACC Media Days with our guy Scott Hamilton of the Post and Courier, joining me on the AAA Heating and Air phone lines. And I mentioned it before the break. You know, the past couple of years seems like going into the ACC Media Days, there's always been some kind of turmoil on the horizon, some upset feelings, teams trying to exit. So I guess this year we'll count that as Thanksgiving dinner, where nobody's about to get divorced, none of your cousins are on probation, and everybody's actually kind of happy for once, if only for a short period of time.
There are no lawsuits looming. Nobody's worried about realignment, at least for a few years. Yeah, I mean, it's a different vibe. But here's the thing, Tyler. Here's the thing, man. For the first time, and I've been around this league for a long time. I'm curious to see how a coach interacts tomorrow, because we've got the circus coming to town.
Mm-hmm.
The Bill Belichick experience. I want to see Bill Belichick do a car wash along Radio Row. I just want to see that. And somebody ask him something like, like they did Mark Richt, how do you eat a sandwich? What's he going to say?
What's Jordan going to allow him to say is the better question to ask.
Is she there? I mean, I pray to God, the good Lord above, hallelujah, that she comes, because that would be the biggest story of the year. It doesn't matter what happens on the field. It doesn't have to matter on the courts. Nothing else will matter this year if Jordan Hudson comes to Charlotte tomorrow and tries to coordinate things on media day for Bill Belichick. Please, God, let that happen.
Now, I know typically, because AC Media Days where you'll have the one-on-one with coaches, almost kind of like, it looks like a hotel room where they're kind of sitting in a corner and media's kind of piled around them. That seems like Bill Belichick's idea of hell if he has to go through that tomorrow.
Now, think about this. He's got 30 minutes on the stage, and then there'll be the post-game gaggle.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell, pardon my French, is Bill Belichick going to say for an hour?
Oh, man. How long is his opening statement going to be?
Well, exactly. Will he pull who was it that pulled that a couple of years ago? Was it Dan Mullen or somebody didn't want to take questions, so they took up the whole time with their opening statement? That happened.
Yeah.
That happened.
That's how you filibuster it.
He filibustered. But then you've got the gaggle afterwards. And does he just sit stone-faced and repeats the same stuff over and over and smirks and scowls, and then his time is up, he gets to go? I don't know. He has obligations he has to meet. I mean, and there are obligations with their partners, the
Sure.
ACC network, this, that, and the other. But here's the thing people aren't talking about. There's one coach. Bill Belichick is the penultimate, the next to last guy. Dave Dorn of NC State. It is going to be like mass exodus when Belichick leaves the stage, and Dorn will be happy, and I'm sideways with him anyhow, that guy. But he's going to be by himself, 4 people in the room. One of them will be his SID.
Yep.
He got lucky because of Bill.
I'll feel the same way for Dorn as I felt for Elko last week, because he was last to go at SEC Media Days at 2:45 on Thursday, where quite literally everybody was packing their things and walking out the door as he was taking the podium. So I'm sure Dorn will get the same kind of vibe tomorrow.
Big difference, though. Dave Dorn is nowhere near the class act that Elko is. I knew Mike when he was the DC at Wake Forest, and I wrote a column. His last game was the Military Bowl in 2016 when Wake Forest beat Temple, and he left to take the job at Notre Dame, and that was like his lifelong dream. And his grandmother, when his grandmother died, on her coffin, they had a Wake Forest blanket and they had a Notre Dame blanket. And it was just this whole deal. But Mike Elko is one of the most thoughtful, articulate, intelligent, decent. You name every good superlative you can about a man, it's Mike Elko. And I was so glad to see him go behind Clownhead Jimbo Fisher. A&M deserves better than that.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens.
Jimbo.
Yeah,
Jimbo
he's going to the ACC network. That's right.
The closed captioning is going to be lit.
Oh, my God. Yeah, gosh, you tell him 60 seconds till commercial, he'll cram in another 400 words.
as a native West Virginian, we don't claim him. We claim Saban. We claim Lou Holtz. All those guys, Rich Rod, and Jimbo, man. I just don't claim that guy.
Well, it's funny because, again, he's still getting paid by A&M to not be their coach. But, he's been doing, like, podcasts and shows and all that kind of stuff. He's clamoring to say something. So I guess this is the natural segue for him to, I don't know how many people are watching the ACC network, but he'll be on it in some capacity.
Hey, where's Terry at, by the way?
You didn't know we restructured our shows around here.
Oh, yeah, so he's like 3 to whatever now.
He's 3 to 6 with Jay. So this is typically it's me and Bill Gunter, but Bill is on vacation this week. So I'm holding down the fort, which is why I'm thankful you were gracious enough to hang in with me for a couple segments here.
Man, so see, this is a bonding moment because I thought because Terry was gone, you were calling me, because like Terry, has kind of like a crush on me, but it's actually different. You wanted me to ride shotgun with you on this journey today.
I did.
I'm darn proud, Tyler. I'm darn proud.
I never know where our conversations are going, but they're always entertaining.
Have you ever seen the movie Heat?
I believe so. A very long time ago.
Oh, yeah. Peter Burns. I've been texting with him. He sent out a tweet. He had never seen it, and I've never seen it, so I'm just wondering. I've never seen E.T. either, by the way.
You never seen E.T.? That's a classic, man.
No. Okay. Young me. Let me take you back to the summer of 1982. My parents dropped me off at the theater with $10. I think I'm 8.
Okay.
And I'm standing there, and I'm looking to my left, and there's the E.T. poster, what I'd come to see. But then my eyes drift to the right. And it's Rocky 3. My decision was made.
Okay, that's
I don't regret it.
I can understand that. That makes perfect sense. Then we'll have to get you to see E.T. at some point, though. That's a classic that everybody deserves to see. Looping back to ACC Media Days, and I'll kind of loop this in with Big 10 as well, because shots are coming across from everywhere. Signetti's taking shots at the SEC. Lashley took his shots. I saw Bielema saying some things. Like it's when the Big 10 is, taking their shots at the SEC, it's more of a you-know-what measuring contest because we're talking about the 2 top dogs.
Right.
When you have people in the ACC taking shots up towards the SEC, what do we consider that?
Well, and it shows the ignorance of Rhett Lashley is what it does. Tyler Head, pop quiz. Are you ready?
Sure, go ahead.
How many different schools have won an ACC title in the 21st century?
I know going back to 2011, it's only been 3.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is like Rhett Lashley cherry-picked that 1964 stat, and I ran through more numbers earlier that the SEC in the past 15 years has had more champions. They've had more teams in the college football playoff, more teams in BCS bowls. If we want to go back that far, like we can play the numbers game all you want, and that can make this look good for the SEC. Don't try that game here.
More egregiously, he forgot the co-championship of the Kentucky Wildcats in 1976.
I did bring that up, but they were not eligible for the postseason, so I didn't know if they could claim that or not.
They should. Derek Ramsey was the quarterback. It was fantastic. I was little. I was just a child. But I know the history of it. And there's a really good, I think it's an SEC. What are the SEC stories?
Yeah, storied.
On Derek Ramsey. Fantastic. Black quarterback in Kentucky. I mean, it's unbelievable. And what a groundbreaking athlete, what a groundbreaking man he was. So I highly encourage that. But back to the larger point, Rhett Lashley, he's saying that now, Tyler. But what will his story be in 2 years, maybe next year when he's coaching in the SEC?
Yeah, when they fire Hugh Freeze and he takes the Auburn job again.
Yeah, he goes to Auburn or he goes to Arkansas or wherever. I just find it absolutely ridiculous.
By the way, he didn't bring up that whole bowl record for the ACC last year, which I thought was convenient.
2-11, baby. 2-11. Jim Phillips did, though. Jim Phillips did.
Yeah, who again? He understands his place right now in third, and he's like, "Hey, we can't be doing 2-11. That's not going to work for us, guys."
Listen. Here's the thing with Jim Phillips. I think Jim Phillips is a decent man. I really do. I think he's a good guy, but he's naive. His beliefs and his principles are admirable. We should all have that. But that cake don't bake in 21st century college athletics. You got to be cutthroat. You got to be looking out for your own. I mean, they put in, and it's in my column today on PostingCourier.com. They instituted where the schools have to put in participation reports now, injury status.
Yeah,
You know, is this
right.
guy questionable, whatnot? There is no punishment if you don't. There is no punishment. He's just hoping everybody does what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and until somebody Lane Kiffins it and just starts finagling with it.
Or Bill Belichick.
Or Belichick.
He had Tom Brady. He had Tom Brady listed as questionable for 6 straight years, or something like that. I mean, I might be speaking slightly out of school, but not really. I mean, guys are going to game the system through that, and throughout the entirety of his hour-long talk yesterday, Jim Phillips kept repeating himself. It's the right thing. It's the right thing to have these reports. It's the right thing to have penalties for storming the field. It's the right thing for this. Because he's a Pollyanna, man, and he would be my league commissioner that I would want if it were like 1958
Sure.
or 1962 or even 1982.
Sure.
But you can't pull that off now in the 21st century. And look, you can love Brett Yormark, you can hate Brett Yormark, but he's a model going forward. The guy who's a carnival barker, who's got some snake oil salesman in him, and who's able to figure out different ways to make a dollar, no matter how disrespectful it might seem.
Absolutely. We'll come back. We'll wrap up the hour. Scott Hamilton from the Post-Courier joining me on the AAA Heating and Air phone lines. It is halftime show. Tyler Head, Captain Dave, on your Wednesday on the game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head, Cap and Dave. Scott Hamilton of the Post and Courier hanging out with me for a couple more minutes here. Talking a lot of Media Days stuff as the Big Ten and ACC Media Days ongoing this week. Of course, last week, SEC Media Days out in Atlanta. Certainly enjoyed our time out there. And at the end of the week, South Carolina found themselves 5th overall in the media poll. Lenore Sellers, to even the surprise of a lot of us here, ending up being the first team quarterback for the preseason All-SEC team. Is that kind of about what you figured the consensus on South Carolina last week was going to be?
Yeah, about like that. I mean, you know how these things, I mean, what are these things actually worth?
Conversation like this right now.
Conversation like this right now. Tyler's got to have content so he gets paid. That's what it is.
Listen,
look,
I'm looking for content wherever I can get it, man.
I'm an AP voter. I'm a top 25, guy and all that. I'll put out a top 25, but what's it worth? I mean, you could have relied on it somewhat a few years ago to give you an idea of how things should work out.
Sure.
But if anything, everything's flipped on its head now. The portal, teams can flip fast. Teams can try to flip and go the opposite direction. I'm talking about Florida State last year. It doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. And look, it's good to put it out there on social media and say, yeah, we're preseason this or we're preseason that. But at the end of the day, it does not matter. And even AP poll doesn't matter. I mean,
sure.
Only thing it does is establish perception. But the selection committee, College Football Playoff Selection Committee, they're supposed to wipe their minds clean when they go in that room for that first ranking. And once those rankings come out, nothing else matters.
Well, listen, I've been in the camp of saying we don't need rankings until really mid to late October when the actual playoff rankings come out. But for some reason, we can't operate as a college football public unless there are numbers next to team names in those first 6-7 weeks of the season for whatever reason.
I agree, but we got to have conversation pieces and the TV networks. It's better. It's easier to sell a game when there's numbers next to those teams.
Well, how will we know who we're allowed to storm the field against? And how will the ACC know who they have to find now that they're adjusting their field storming fines?
$50,000. That's what it is. $50,000. I mean, that's as nominal as you can get, isn't it? $50,000.
Sure.
First offense, hell, storm. You think Wake Forest, all 5 fans are going to storm if they were to beat NC State again? Sure.
Of course.
That's going to happen.
Of course.
Yeah, so the ACC where everything means less.
Is that should that be the new motto? Can we get commercials for that?
It just means less.
What celebrity could we get to do the "it just means less" commercial?
Kevin Hart, he's small.
Oh, that'd be a good one. Does he have any ties to any ACC schools? I feel like it's got to be someone with a tie-in.
Who would be Kevin Hart's school?
Oh man,
Little old Clemson. Old Clemson.
There you go. He probably jumped on the bandwagon a couple years ago when they were at the top of college football, so that wouldn't shock me. What is Dabo today or is that tomorrow?
Oh no, wait. Kevin Hart's team would be Miami because he's buddies with The Rock.
Ah, that's right. Well, that seems like a one-sided friendship, if we're being honest here.
Hey, by the way, no word on Rasul Faison.
Yeah.
482 recaptivity.
I was going to ask you about that. You had your story a couple weeks ago that, hey, we think something might be happening, I think at that point, July the 9th. And, Beamer last week at Media Days seemed optimistic, and here we are 9 days later. Camp starts next week, and we still know nothing. So I just kind of throw my hands up at this point. Who knows?
I was texting with some people in his camp this morning, actually, and I mean they're at their wits' ends about it because every day that goes by is a missed opportunity for him in a myriad ways. One, if he were to decide to go the NFL route, that's another camp that's opening that he won't be a part of, that he won't have an opportunity to try to make that roster. Or two, those are NIL dollars that he's not putting in his pocket right now because nobody knows if he's going to be on the team or not. I mean, they have seven figures worth of deals ready when they get the word. That's what's happening, and it's pretty remarkable how long this has actually taken. I mean, when I was told about it,
they said they expected it around July 9th. And people took it as the gospel. Like I said, definitely on July 9th. No, it was around July 9th. And nothing happened. And I was questioned. But now I think it's to the point where people are realizing that the NCAA is just ridiculous.
Well, I think we've known that for a while, but this just highlights how insane it can be. Yeah, he's kind of got all his eggs in the Carolina basket now because I think all but 2 NFL teams have started their camps up. So that, option is pretty much dried up at this point.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
and what they did, and I know that they had set internally a July 4th deadline to determine if he was going to ride it out and see if he could get made eligible or if he was going to go pro. And the people at South Carolina, and these are what my sources tell me, they said, no, stick it out. We need you to play running back for us. And if it doesn't happen, we'll go the legal route. And they decided to go with that. And look where they are now.
fingers crossed. We'll have you back on Friday. Is that correct?
I guess.
Well,
yeah.
if you're available, I'd love to have you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well,
are we going to do the video thing? I like it when we do video.
We can do video. We can do that. And I don't know, maybe we'll have a ruling by then. Who knows?
All right, man.
All right. Appreciate it. He's Scott Hamilton of the Post and Courier. Tyra Head along with you. One more hour to go of the halftime show on your Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is hour number 3. It is the halftime show. It's Tyler Head along with you. Fonsola here alongside Captain Dave on your Wednesday on the game. Again, a lot of things going on around the college football world with the respective media days for the Big Ten and the ACC, and we'll certainly dive into more of what was said today as you have some characters talking like Fran Brown, who's always good for a couple quotes up there in Charlotte. Became one of my favorite coaches just to listen to him talk. As of right now, because you never truly know what's going to come out of his mouth. But we'll get to that tomorrow as the week rolls along. Looking right now, though, as we're sitting here on Wednesday, July the 23rd, we are now right a little over a week away from South Carolina getting camp started. We learned yesterday what the official schedule of events is going to be coming up next week, and next Thursday, you'll have the players reporting. You'll have Coach Beamer speaking at 3 o'clock for his usual pre-camp press conference, and then you'll have the availability for the players. They'll be inside the Spurrier indoor facility, and, media will be allowed to go up, ask them questions, all that kind of stuff. So we can hopefully get some good insight and some good quotes from that to talk about next week. So you got that, and then Friday, of course, is when camp officially starts for South Carolina, and this is going to be such an intriguing camp. And I feel like every single year we have a lot of the same questions about this team. Like the past couple of years, offensive line has been a consistent question. Last year it was about finding that cohesive starting five. The year before that, you obviously had the injuries and all that kind of stuff that made the offensive line as big of a struggle as it was. But this year, for one, it's just kind of like, okay, who is going to be your starting offensive lineman? We got a pretty good idea. If we were to craft a starting five right now, I feel pretty confident saying that Josiah Thompson's probably going to be your left tackle. Boaz Stanley likely going to be your center based on what we've heard and all that kind of stuff so far. I mean, we talked about this yesterday with Mike Uva of Gamecock Central. You would think Tree and Tro are good options for those respective guard spots. I think Cason Henry is going to be your right tackle again, but somebody could come in and steal that, right? You have a lot of depth. You have a lot of guys that have come in from the transfer portal in the offseason that'll be vying for these spots as well. And that's one of those things. And be careful, as we learned back in the spring, don't put out a projected depth chart unless you know for sure. But I think we're really going to be clamoring to see what that starting unit ends up looking like by the time the season rolls around. And that's something that can obviously be fluid and change depending on your performance. Again, you hope to figure it out pretty quickly once you actually get into the season, because the last thing you want to be doing is constantly rotating offensive linemen in and out, because if you're doing that, that means you have a consistent issue, and you're not getting that cohesion that we know is so important when it comes to those starting five up front. So that's a big storyline of camp, is it's always going to be every single year. And going back to what Scott Hamilton and I just talked about there a couple minutes ago as we await the ruling on Rasul Faison is, okay, how do you divvy up your workload for your running backs? Because unfortunately, it hasn't happened in the past 7 months, so I'm not exactly anticipating it happening within the next 9 days leading up to the start of camp. How do you, decide who's doing what at camp? Because you would obviously like to think and be hopeful that Faison's still going to get an eligibility ruling at some point, but you don't know that for sure. And you can't go through camp the entire time preparing with him as a one and then it not happen and having to scramble at the last second. You have to have an idea that, or at least operate knowing that there's a possibility that he may not be deemed eligible. And I think when South Carolina went out and got Isaiah Augusta out of the transfer portal from Colorado, and they even said then, hey, this isn't us giving you an indication that we think Faison's not going to be ruled eligible, but it allows you to at least have a plan B, right? Now, no matter what, you have at least 4 scholarship running backs in your room. But as you get into camp starting, and there's nothing wrong with still giving Faison quality reps, but saying, okay, well, if he's not going to play, then how do we get Oscar Attaway as involved as he needs to be? How do we get Auguste, who, again, is getting up to speed with this new program and new team, get him the reps he needs so if those are going to be our primary guys when the season starts, they're prepared, and it's not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. These guys will have reps with the ones and all that kind of stuff. Again, it's not a complicated thing to do, but it's something you have to manage the right way. So you're seemingly prepared for every outcome when the season gets here, whether Faison is eligible or not. Again, I think it's ridiculous that we're this late into the process and we still don't know one way or the other, because that's the thing to me. At least say something. Like, if he's not going to be eligible, just say so. That way it's like, okay, that sucks, obviously, but now we know, all right, well, Attaway, Augustave, Jordan Howell, and Matthew Fuller are now the running backs, and let's deal with that. Let's go forward with that idea instead of this will he, won't he, how do we approach this type of deal that we've had for this entire offseason. So we'll see there. But those two major storylines when it comes to looking ahead to the start of camp. Special teams as well. I mean, special teams is a trademark of a Shane Beamer coach team. Has been for his entire time here. Has been for the lineage of the Beamer family in coaching, going all back to his dad, Frank. It's what Beamer teams do well is special teams. And this is a very rare instance that you run into where pretty much all of that is gone from a season ago. And he said it last week. Kai Kroger was the only punter that Carolina had over the course of his 4 years. Hunter Rogers basically earned his starts about halfway through Beamer's first year, but for the better part of 3.5 seasons, you had one guy doing the long snapping. You've gone through kickers these past couple years after Mitch Jeter left and Alex Herrera took over a season ago, but you're resetting all those spots. And that's going to be ongoing competitions in camp, and competitions in positions that are trickier, I feel like, to figure out in a camp and practice setting than some other spots, right? Because especially kicker, and we talked about this last year where, Herrera and William Joyce were going head-to-head for the kicker spot, that it's like, well, I'm not really going to feel comfortable about this until I see them start making kicks in actual games, because it's one thing to go out there and make all of your kicks in practice, even in scrimmage situations. It's another thing to do it in front of 90, 100,000 people with the game on the line and the clock ticking and all those kind of things. And as we saw, Herrera did miss some pretty key kicks in games that ended up, costing South Carolina when the season was, was all said and done. So that's a spot. If it is Mason Love that's going to be doing doing the kicking this season, that you obviously want to hear good things out of camp, where saying, hey, both these guys are making all their kicks. That's great. But even still, there's going to be a little bit of hesitation until you see him start making those kicks in actual games, particularly in pressure situations. Like, if he can nail a 45-yarder against South Carolina State while you're up by 30, that's great. But I'm even more interested to see him do that on the road at LSU, trying to tie the game with 2 minutes left or something along those lines. You know what I mean? Like, that's where you start getting that comfortability with what you have at kicker. And lastly here, and these aren't just all the only things to watch in storylines when it comes to camp opening up, but one that I'm also pretty darn intrigued about is the backup quarterback. Now, when you have a guy like Sellers at your starting spot, you're not as concerned about backup QB, but when you go back to a season ago, Sellers banged up. Sellers had to sit the last half of the LSU game, didn't start against Akron, was off the field for a couple plays, couple drives against the likes of Kentucky. And when you have a mobile quarterback, you're obviously opening yourself up to injuries happening, right? With the backup quarterback spot, you have a lot of promising young talent with, with Air Noland and with Cutter Woods, but neither one of those guys has ever taken a snap in college as an actual college quarterback. And there's, concern with that if you did end up having your starter get hurt, which, knock on wood again, hoping it doesn't happen. But if it did happen, especially in like game 1 against Virginia Tech, do you feel the most confident in turning it over to one of those guys? Or would you rather go with a safer, more experienced route by saying, hey, Doty, you get in there, manage this, and we'll figure it out from there? Because I think that is a possible option, right? because Doty does have experience as a starter, played a long time. Not saying that if, again, God forbid, knock on wood, this doesn't happen. If you were in a situation where Sellers was out for a couple weeks, would you eventually turn it over to Noland or a Cutter Woods? Yeah, probably. But in the short term, especially early in the season, till you get comfortable with those guys, especially, and get their feet wet a little bit, playing in some garbage time or whatever, I feel like Doty's an option. I'm not saying it's going to be the end-all, be-all, but I think that's something you should definitely consider with how this quarterback room currently looks right now, with nobody other than Sellers having legitimate experience, besides Doty, of course. So things to monitor, things to watch as camp gets going, and we're not going to have all these questions answered even by the time the season starts, I feel like. It's just those are kind of, some of the more pressing issues, pressing concerns going into the start of camp that we're certainly going to keep our eye on. And again, media is only going to be able to view a small window each and every day. Looking at the schedule that was put out yesterday, next Friday and next Saturday for day 1 and day 2 of camp, it's that 9:23, that exact window where I think it's like 15 minutes. So basically up until about 9:38, the media will be able to be out there and see whatever's happening, whether it's stretches or maybe some drills or something along those lines. But we're going to try and gather whatever we can out of those little snippets that do come out of the Windows availability for practice, as well as, Wes and Chris, who have great connections within the program, what they hear, what they report on as, we start to craft an idea of what this 2025 South Carolina Gamecock team can be leading up to the start of the season against Virginia Tech in game number 1. So we'll keep an eye on that, but excited that we're almost there. We're getting closer and closer to the start of the season. Looping back into things at the other respective media days, I feel like the SEC is currently under attack by a couple coaches that took some shots yesterday. We'll dive back into that coming up next as hour number 3 rolls along. By the way, at 2:30, going to re-rack the conversation I had with Cale Gundy of the Sports Animal in Knoxville. Of course, a former Oklahoma quarterback, as well as a longtime assistant on the Oklahoma staff, gives insight into the Sooners ahead of the week, whatever week that is, in the middle of October, matchup against South Carolina over at Williams-Brice Stadium. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head and Captain Dave on your Wednesday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Kevin Day producing on the other side of the glass. I've said this a couple times today already, but I'll reiterate, the SEC is under constant attack from coaches around the country, taking their respective shots at a lot of different things in the SEC, including the scheduling model, according to Curt Cignetti, head coach of the Indiana Hoosiers. Cut number 3 again here, Dave. Curt Cignetti yesterday, when asked about why he canceled the series, or why Indiana canceled the series against Virginia, coming up in 2027 and 2029, replacing them with Kennesaw State and Eastern Illinois, respectively, his response was, to take a shot at the SEC.
Yeah, that was a scheduling philosophy that began before I was hired, but I did sign off on it upon being hired before our first season, okay? And look, here's the bottom line, okay? We picked up an extra home game, and we play 9 conference games. The 2 best conferences in college football, any football guy that's objective will tell you, is the Big Ten and the SEC, all right? 12 of the 16 SEC teams play 3 G5 or an FCS game. 12 of those teams play 36 games, 29 G5 games, and 7 FCS games, and 1 less conference game. All right? So we figured we'd just adopt SEC scheduling philosophy. Some people don't like it. I'm more focused in on those 9 conference games. Not only do we want to play 9 conference games, okay, and have the 4-4 championship, the playoff format, okay, we want to have play-in games to decide who plays in those playoffs. Championship weekend, let's play 3 versus 6 and 4 versus 5. You want to decide that on the field, make sure everybody's strength of schedule is what it needs to be? Let's make everybody play 9 conference games, and on championship weekend, 3 will play 6, 4 will play 5. And there's still room for another at-large in that format. And why shouldn't the Big Ten have 4 AQs? Because Ohio State actually finished 4th in the conference at the end of the season. Indiana and Penn State were tied for 2nd. They won the tiebreaker. Ohio State won the national championship. Okay? Put the best teams in the playoff, give the best leagues the AQs, but make them earn it with play-in games.
See, there's a lot to unpack from that. The SEC scheduling model thing is really funny because the SEC at least requires you to play at least 1 Power 4 opponent outside of the conference. So in a way, that almost kind of fills that gap for that 9th conference game that the SEC doesn't have at this point in time. But, as aggravating as it may be to hear what Cignetti had to say there, I also completely understand why he's saying what he said, right? Because Indiana last year really lucked out. They had a relatively easy non-conference slate. They had an easier Big Ten slate where, the toughest teams they really played was Ohio State and Michigan. Lost to Ohio State, obviously, but they didn't have to play Penn State, didn't have to play Oregon. I don't think they played Southern Cal or anything like that. They lucked out, and they were obviously in a position to make the college ball playoff, which they did. And if you're Curt Cignetti, based off of what the current structure of it is, where you do have to, again, impress the committee, so, who seems to really like number of wins in the win column based on their precedent they set last year, why not do something that's going to allow you to have at least 3 guaranteed wins? And not that Virginia is the most challenging Power 4 opponent, but you feel even more confident taking on Kennesaw State or Eastern Illinois that you're going to be able to get that 1 win, as opposed to, hey, if you play Virginia, if you played, I don't know, Cincinnati or somebody else like that from the mid to low tier of another Power 4 conference, I get it. And then it's like, okay, you win those 3 games, and then in your 9 conference games, find a way to go 7-2, and you'll probably be in position to make the college ball playoff. It makes perfect sense. And then he's advocating for, obviously, the 4-4-2-2-1 model, where in the Big Ten, if it operated the way that we think it would with the playing games that he's talking about, all you'd have to do is be in like the top 6. This kind of falls in line with what Eli Drinkwitz said last week about his proposed 30-team college football playoff, where it's like, hey, you know Indiana or Missouri is likely not going to get themselves to the very tip top of the conference, but if you can just be in that top 6 and get yourself in a play-in, then, you know, that's a lot more obtainable and something that an Indiana could probably do on a year-in, year-out basis. So, again, you're going to say things that craft whatever narrative you need to support for your individual program to be successful, which is the same thing that happened with Rhett Lashley at ACC Media Days, cut number 7 here, as he criticized the SEC, saying, well, it's just top-heavy at the end of the day.
You know, I learned, it had helped me personally. I've been in that league before, I've been in the SEC, so I kind of knew what we were getting into, but I think myself and our team and our staff and our program learned that it really is every week. In the ACC, you can't have an off week or you're going to get beat. It doesn't matter if you're playing at Clemson, and it doesn't matter if you're playing whoever that last place team is at home. If you have an off week, if you play like we did in the playoff game, you're probably going to lose. You know, I mean, look at our Duke game. That was a miracle we won. We went out and turned it over 6 times. We should have lost. And that was a good team. And so it's just a week in, week out. That's the league you want to be in. That's where you want to be. I mean, you look at our league, we had like 4 10-win teams, 2 playoff teams, a handful of 9-win teams, 13 bowl teams. I mean, there's just not a lot of easy wins on the schedule. And there's other leagues that claim depth. But like, the SEC's had the same 6 schools win the championship since 1964. The same 6. Not a single one has been different since 1964. It's top heavy to me. That's not depth.
Again, I think that's a pretty crazy reach when you talk about, you know, the SEC only being those teams at the very top, because I think the middle of the conference is very strong. And again, we talk about being very fluid with that 5 to 12 roughly that South Carolina kind of finds themselves in on a year-in, year-out basis. I think the middle to bottom of the SEC is stronger than that of the ACC. But again, going back to what I said about Curt Cignetti, I completely understand why Rhett Lashley is making that point. You're in a conference that last year got the benefit of the doubt. You lost the conference championship game as, you know, at that point in time, an 11-2 team, and you were still given the blessing of making it into college football playoff because they deemed what you had done up to that point was strong enough. Now, again, hindsight being 2020, with how SMU ended up losing to Penn State, if you ask people on the committee, honestly, they said, yeah, well, maybe we should have put in Bama or Ole Miss or South Carolina because they likely would put up a better fight. So if I'm Rhett Lashley, I'm looking at this saying, you know, I may not get that same benefit of the doubt again, given how the playoff ended up going for myself, for Indiana, teams like that. So I got to push this narrative as hard as I can that how the ACC is difficult, right? Which I'm not saying is not challenging, but I don't think it's, you know, deeper top to bottom than what the SEC is. You know what I mean? So, again, you're going to, as a coach, always going to craft the narrative to cater to whatever you're trying to do, which is exactly what Cignetti and Rhett Lashley are doing here. I do think it's interesting, you know, Cignetti, going back to a year ago, was this, like, lovable story when it came to Indiana, because who is this confident Indiana coach talking about, I win, Google me, and these kind of things? Like, these are things unheard of for a coach at a school like that, especially in football, and went out there and, you know, backed it up with making the college football playoff. But, you know, between canceling the Virginia series and now being defensive when talking about it like he was yesterday, I do think a lot of people are maybe kind of falling out of love with Curt Cignetti. I love it, by the way, because he's not afraid to say what's on his mind. And I appreciate that because we need more honesty out of college football coaches. But it is kind of interesting to see the dynamic slowly starting to shift on Cignetti now that he's talking about, you know, other conferences and things like this that maybe he wasn't quite doing a year ago. So we'll see how Indiana does in year number 2, and if you know, he can back up these claims that he's making, because you can't say those kind of things and then go out there and go 5-7. So we'll see what happens for the Sigs in year number 2 out there in Bloomington. Earlier today, I talked with Cale Gundy of the Sports Animal in Norman, Oklahoma. Of course, a former quarterback for the Sooners, as well as a longtime assistant on the Oklahoma staff, was there when Beamer was there a couple years ago, to get some insight and some thoughts into the Oklahoma Sooners ahead of that matchup they have coming up, I believe, October 18th against South Carolina here at Williams-Brice Stadium for an early kick that day. Let's share that conversation once again coming up next. It is the halftime show Tyler Head and Captain Dave along with you on your Wednesday on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the game, as we've been doing all summer long. We're taking a look at different opponents that are on South Carolina's schedule, and one of the more notable games this upcoming fall is the Sooners' trip into Williams-Brice Stadium coming up in October. And Oklahoma, one of the more intriguing teams in the SEC, which we'll get into plenty here in just a couple of minutes as we talk with Cale Gundy, former Oklahoma quarterback, former assistant on the coaching staff. Now we're doing some work with the sports animal out there in Norman, Oklahoma. Any other accolades I left off that list there, Coach?
No, that's good enough. We don't want to go down that it's a short list, Tyler. So I appreciate you guys letting me come on.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you taking your time for us this morning. Of course, last week was SEC Media Days. Heard from all the coaches. Venables was there. Mateer was there. You know, what was, if anything, your overall takeaway from what you heard from the Oklahoma contingent last week in Atlanta?
Well, I've been hearing it ever since John Mateer arrived on campus. I'm trying to make sure everybody kind of calms down and pumps the brake a little bit. You know, let's make sure we got to see this out on the field on Saturdays. There's a lot of excitement around here. There's no doubt that Oklahoma football is going to be better than they were last year. Last year was a tough year, tons of injuries, some youth at some positions, youth at quarterback, not a very good offensive line, some youth there. So they're going to be a better football team. What does that mean? Does that mean 2 more wins? That mean 3 wins? I could see him winning 6 games. I could see him winning 9 games. But we'll wait and see whenever we get to these Saturdays.
You mentioned kind of having to temper expectations when it comes to John Mateer, because there's been so much buzz this offseason. We've talked about him plenty. I've asked a lot of other people about him, what they see from him and how that can translate over to his time in Oklahoma, because he only had the 1 year as a starter, only played against 2 Power 5 opponents in that time in Washington and Texas Tech, and completed less than 50% of his passes in those games, though he did run all over Texas Tech in that win for Wazoo. When you look at the tape from a quarterback's perspective, what do you see that you like, and what does concern you about John Mateer?
Well, so I totally agree with everything you're saying. Again, the teams they played against last year are definitely not going to be the teams he's going to play against this year. So he's about 6'1". He's about 225 pounds. I mean, he's got big legs. He looks like a perfect size tailback back there. How he's built. He's strong. He's physical. He's tough. He's got a quick release, powerful release. He can throw on the run. I started watching him early last season, about the first 4 or 5 games. I was kind of doing some homework for some my coaching buddies in the profession, possibly looking for possible QB transfers, and he was very erratic, inconsistent, but the second half of the season he got really good. So he kind of has it. He has swag to him. He's got some demeanor. I mean, he's the guy that, if there was a bar fight, I think he'd be the first guy in the front. I really do. I don't think he'd be the QB that hides in the back of the room. I think he'd be right there in the front, protecting his people and his friends. So we're going to see how good he really is. There's some players that they brought in surrounding him. There's a lot of high expectations for the running back out of Cal, Jaden Ott, that everybody they say this guy has all the tools. But to me, it comes down to the offensive line. How much better can that offensive line get? Because when you play in the Southeastern Conference week in and week out, you're playing the best players, the best teams in the whole country. And if you can't win the line of scrimmage, you're not going to win at the end of the day.
Mentioning that offensive line again, talking to Cale Gundy of the Sports Animal out there in Norman about the Oklahoma Sooners. We'll jump into the offensive line because you have 4 of your returners coming back from last year. You added in a couple of transfers from Stanford. And look, Coach Bendenbaugh has overseen some really good offensive lines in his time in Oklahoma. What has changed, and what's the hope in the offseason that this unit can get better compared to where they were last year?
Yeah, they've got a starting center that played last year, fought through some injuries. A guy named Troy Everett, who's kind of the vocal guy, the leader. They brought in a transfer from, I believe, Western Carolina, and Derek Simmons, who's going to start at right tackle, who they've been really impressed with him. And then they're going to have some guys who've been in the system the last 2 or 3 years, kind of that'll sprinkle in everywhere else. How good are these other guys? How good are these guys? That's the deal. You know, to me, if they're going to be successful, they need at least 2 guys to make first, second, or third team SEC all-conference offensive line. They have to. Or are these guys just filling spots? They signed a couple of freshmen that they say have a chance to possibly be as good as anybody that's ever come through there for Coach Beanbo, which says a lot. I'm great friends with Coach Beanbo, but those are freshmen. They'll play some this year. I don't know if they'll ever end up starting, possibly if somebody's injured, but it's just kind of hit and miss. We're kind of waiting to see, because the strength in the SEC is the defensive lines. And if you don't have strength on the offensive line, you're going to get beat on Saturday.
And we obviously saw, Carolina came in and took advantage of that offensive line last year and got out to that pretty quick lead and ran away with the game from there. Going back to media days last week, I did think it was interesting. Jackson Arnold, who obviously is now at Auburn, put the blame on himself, saying, hey, I was not good enough last year, and that's why I struggled at Oklahoma, why the team struggled. How did you read into that? Is that just a guy saying what he needs to say, or do you think it was maybe him not holding up his end of the deal a season ago?
No, I think he's I think he's grown and mature, and at times as a quarterback, you take those responsibilities, and the last thing you want to do is point a lot of fingers, because you can't gain anything from it. But I can tell you this: he was not surrounded well at all. He was in a bad position. I don't care who was there. I don't care if it was Baker Mayfield in that position last year. You're going to struggle. You'd been running for your life. You don't have any run game. 2 or 3 of your starting receivers are injured or out for the season. So he was in a bad position. It's hard because he's always been, if you're a quarterback and you go to Oklahoma, that means you're probably pretty dang good. You probably had a lot of success coming out of high school, and he did. He came out of Denton Guyer and won state championships and was one of the best quarterbacks coming out of high school, always enjoyed success, and then all of a sudden he's running for his life and he's scrambling and put in really bad positions. So I think he just took the high road and did the smart thing.
Getting a couple more minutes here with Cale Gundy of the Sports Animal out in Norman. Of course, everybody here at South Carolina very familiar with Brent Venables from his time at Clemson, and I think there was a lot of high hopes when he took over the job at Oklahoma, but unfortunately through 3 years he's just a smidge over 500, and a lot of people around the country talking about this being a make-or-break year for him. What's the sentiment of the fan base with Venables as he goes into year number 4?
It's what you would think it would be. I mean, 6-7, 10-3, and 6-7 is not going to cut it here. Again, people around here are having a hard time adapting what's going on, and the biggest problem is you're playing in the Southeastern Conference. That's the biggest problem. That's number one, and it's a clear cut way above what the second biggest problem is you're playing in the Southeastern Conference. And I learned that last year for the very first time, because again, I played at OU. I coached there for 23 years. We always heard talk about SEC. We had a great run. We won a ton of conference championships, played in a lot of college football playoffs, and with hardly very little would we play in the SEC. We'd play at Georgia every now and then, and Alabama every now and then. We play Tennessee, this and that, whatever. But when you start showing up on Saturdays at home or away, and you see these teams and you see these players and what they look like, it's just completely different. I think it took the state of Oklahoma. I think it took the Oklahoma fans by shock. But Brent's got to get this thing turned around, and this is an important season. He lost 2 great players on defense, and Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman, to the NFL. They are better than what you saw last year. I think they ran out of gas because the offense was so bad. It mentally beat them up, and they just ran out of gas. If the offense can hang in there this year and produce some, this defense, I think, has got to be a pretty chance to be pretty good. Last year, defensively in the SEC, there were 10 other teams that gave up fewer points defensively. So you talk defense, but when you're 11th out of 16 in the conference and giving up points, you got to be better than that. You got to be in the top 5, 6 in the SEC defensively if you're going to be successful.
About 60 more seconds here. Trip to South Carolina coming up on October 18th will be an early kick. Where does this game rank? It is the week after Red River against Texas. Where does this game rank on the challenge level for Oklahoma this year?
Well, it's huge. And first of all, I'm very disappointed that it's not a night game. I'm going to be there, and I wanted to be there for a night game. I wanted to see the experience. I'm good friends with Shane Beamer, known him for a long time, stay in touch with him, we talk. This is a huge game. Obviously, what South Carolina came in and physically just dominated OU last year, what Lenore Sellers can bring to the table, the opposing quarterback. This is a big game. But you know what, Tyler? Every game's a big game in the SEC.
That's right.
I mean, everybody used to say it when we played in the Big 12. Every game's a big team. But, I mean, it's just, to me, it's a complete different monster playing in the Southeastern Conference.
Well, looking forward to that game coming up in mid-October. I'm sure I'll be talking to you between now and then as we get closer and learn more about this Oklahoma team. Appreciate it, Coach.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Is Cale Gundy from the Sports Animal, of course, longtime assistant and former quarterback for the Sooners as well. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Hayden, Cap and Dave with you, wrapping up your Wednesday edition of the show before we turn things over to Jay and Terry for the postgame show today. By the way, they'll be out at the Nest tomorrow from 3 until 6 at 1331 Gadsden Street. You can go by, hang out with them, and check out some of the cool appliances that the Nest does have to offer. I wanted to hit this before we get out of here. It was right about this time yesterday that we learned the news that Ozzy Osbourne had passed away at the age of 76. We talked about it a little bit. Obviously, his impact on the world of music as well as pop culture with the TV show and all that kind of stuff. And scrolling through Twitter last night, reading all the tributes and watching the video of his final performance from just a couple weeks ago, I did come across something that I did not know existed. Dave, if you will, cut number 9 for me here. This is Ozzy Osbourne singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" at Wrigley Field back in 2003 in only the way that Ozzy Osbourne could.
All right, Chicago. I want to hear a real crazy crowd start singing with me. Are you ready? Are you ready? I can't hear you. Are you ready? Come on. 1, 2, 3, and let's go out to the ball game. Let's go out to the river. Take me in the arena to I don't remember what I have to do. Run out of the but if we 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Yeah, let's get some runs. Come on, don't mess around. Let's get some runs, guys.
Dave, what's your count? I think you got maybe 10 words right out of the whole song.
Yeah, about that. But notice it's halfway through he started hitting that tune real perfectly.
He did, but it's like, and that's obviously something that's very sacred to Cubs fans. And typically if somebody were to get up there and not know the words, it would be met with a lot of vitriol. But like for Ozzy Osbourne, it's okay, right? He gave his own flair to it, and for that we enjoy it for that reason alone, right?
Absolutely.
Oh man, that was great. Again, seeing all the tributes and stuff from him about him yesterday was really neat. It's kind of crazy to think, looking back, and people were posting clips of the Osbourne show and all that kind of stuff from the early 2000s, and it's hard to think like, man, he was only like 50 at that point in time. Like, he seems like he should have been older than 76, you know what I mean? Because he's been around, obviously, at the top of the music world for such a long time. It seems like 76 is still, like, young, all things considered, for what he did and how big of a deal he was, for so long.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories, which I can't tell completely on the air, is about the last time he dropped acid.
Okay.
And he said he wound up in a field for an hour talking to a horse.
I did see that.
And then he said, didn't the horse turn around and said something to him? It's hilarious.
Told him to blank off if you want to fill in the gaps there. Which that makes total sense. Man, he lived quite a life, one of a kind. I think I watched that. So he did that final show, I believe July 5th. It was only a couple weeks ago. But I think I've watched the video of him singing "Mama, I'm Coming Home" about like 5 times in the past 24 hours. Like, so cool, and it really felt like truly his way of saying goodbye. And I don't know if there was indication that he only had a couple weeks left to live, but it really gives you kind of chills watching it back now, knowing that he was only going to be around for a couple more weeks.
Yeah, I'm so glad we have that performance.
Yeah, and, again, he was dealing with Parkinson's while that was happening, and about halfway through the song, he really does kind of start to fall into that rhythm of singing, hitting the high notes and stuff like that. Yeah, glad we got at least one more performance out of him there. And again, his legacy in the music world and pop culture and sports world will truly never never be lost. He, of course, played Chipper Jones up to the plate for all those years with Crazy Train when he was with the Braves. So again, his impact felt far and wide, and certainly going to miss Ozzy Osbourne and all the chaos that he brought to everyday life. So yeah, I thought that was a cool find yesterday with the take me out to the ball game there with the Chicago Cubs. But that'll do it for today's edition of the halftime show. Appreciate Scott Hamilton, the Post and Courier, hanging out for a little bit earlier on today, and we'll dive into whatever comes up tomorrow as well. So for Captain Dave and Tyler Head, coming up next, it's the post game show with Jay and Terry here on the game.